racist hotel manager evicts a black guest, realizes far too that he's the new owner. Darnell Wright stepped out of his car, the weight of his recent layoff still heavy on his shoulders. He had decided to drive to the Elmwood Inn, a place he hoped would provide him with the peace and clarity he desperately needed. The sun hung low in the sky, casting an orange hue over the historic facade of the hotel. He had heard whispers of its charm, a relic of a bygone era, nestled in a neighborhood undergoing transformation. But as he approached the entrance, an uneasy feeling settled in his gut. With a deep breath, Darnell pushed the heavy double doors open. The lobby was grand, adorned with vintage chandeliers and a polished wooden reception desk. Yet the moment he crossed the threshold, he sensed something was off. The atmosphere felt thick, charged with an unspoken tension. He smiled politely at the receptionist, an older woman with a forced smile that barely reached her eyes. Welcome to the Elmwood Inn. How can I assist you?" she asked, her tone devoid of warmth. "I have a reservation under Darnell Wright," he replied, hoping to break the ice. The receptionist typed his name into the computer, her frown deepening as she glanced at the screen. "One moment, please." Darnell shifted nervously, glancing around the lobby. A few guests sat scattered about, their hushed conversations punctuated by the clinking of glasses from the bar in the corner. But it was the hotel manager who caught his attention. Victor Lang, a man whose presence seemed to dominate the room, stood with arms crossed, watching Darnell with a scrutinizing gaze. The air felt colder under Victor's intense scrutiny. After what felt like an eternity, the receptionist looked back at Darnell, her expression now one of concern. "I'm sorry, Mr. Wright. It appears there's been a mistake with your reservation. Unfortunately, we cannot accommodate you at this time." "Excuse me?" Darnell asked, his heart racing. "I made the reservation last week. I have the confirmation email right here." He fished out his phone, tapping the screen to pull up the email. Victor stepped forward, cutting off the receptionist before she could respond. "We don't have room for you, Mr. Wright. I suggest you find another hotel. We have certain standards here at the Elmwood Inn." His voice dripped with condescension, the implication clear. Darnell felt his face heat up, a mix of anger and embarrassment flooding his system. "What do you mean by that? Are you saying you won't let me stay here because I'm black?" Victor's expression hardened. "This is a respectable establishment. I'm not obligated to explain my decisions to you." The dismissal stung, but Darnell refused to back down. "Listen, I drove 2 hours to get here. I need a place to stay. You can't just kick me out." Victor chuckled, a harsh mocking sound. "You're mistaken if you think you have a right to be here. I suggest you leave quietly before we have more trouble." Darnell's fists clenched at his sides. The injustice of it all burned in his chest. He glanced at the receptionist, who seemed to shrink back under Victor's glare. "This is unacceptable," he said, his voice steady despite the turmoil within. "I'm not going anywhere until I speak to someone in charge." "Consider this your final warning," Victor snapped. "Leave now, or I will have you removed." A surge of adrenaline rushed through Darnell as he locked eyes with Victor. He was not about to let this man intimidate him. "You think you can just treat people like this? I'll make sure everyone knows about your little operation here." With that, Darnell turned on his heel, storming out of the lobby. The chill of the evening air hit him like a slap, but he welcomed it. He needed to collect his thoughts to process the humiliation he had just endured. Darnell paced outside, his mind racing. He had always prided himself on his resilience, on his ability to rise above adversity. But this felt different. How could a hotel, a place of hospitality, turn him away simply for the color of his skin? The unfairness gnawed at him, igniting a fire he hadn't felt in a long time. His phone buzzed in his pocket, snapping him back to reality. It was a text from his best friend, Marcus. "How's the hotel? You settled in yet?" Darnell hesitated, fingers hovering over the screen. He wanted to tell Marcus everything, how he felt belittled, how his dream of a peaceful getaway had shattered. But he didn't want to burden his friend with his troubles. Instead, he typed back, "It's fine, just need some fresh air." After a few moments, he decided to take a walk around the neighborhood, hoping to clear his mind. The streets were alive with the sounds of laughter and music, a stark contrast to the hostility he had just faced. He passed by small cafes and art galleries, each one a reminder of the vibrant community surrounding the Elmwood Inn. As he wandered, Darnell's thoughts began to shift from anger to resolve. He couldn't let Victor's actions go unchecked. He needed to confront the manager, to assert his dignity and demand answers. But how? Suddenly, Darnell stopped in front of a quaint bookstore, its window display showcasing local authors and stories of resilience. An idea sparked in his mind. What if he used this opportunity to not only stand up for himself, but to shed light on the systemic issues that plague places like the Elmwood Inn? Determined, he turned back toward the hotel, his heart pounding with a renewed sense of purpose. He would confront Victor, but this time he would come prepared. He would document the encounter, take notes, and gather evidence. Darnell knew he had to be strategic. Fighting fire with fire would only escalate tensions. As he approached the entrance, his resolve hardened. He pushed the doors open, stepping back into the lobby. Victor was still at the reception desk, flipping through papers. Darnell took a deep breath, steeling himself for what was to come. "Victor," he said, his voice firm as he approached the desk. Victor looked up, his expression shifting from surprise to irritation. "What do you want now?" "I want to talk," Darnell declared, standing taller, refusing to back down. "You can't just treat me like this. I deserve an explanation." Victor scoffed, but Darnell pressed on. "I'm not going to let you intimidate me. I'm going to make sure everyone knows how you treat guests here." "Is that a threat?" Victor replied, a smirk creeping onto his lips. "No, it's a promise," Darnell shot back. Victor's smile faded as he leaned forward, his voice low and menacing. "You really should know your place, Mr. Wright. This is not the time or the place for your outbursts." Darnell felt a surge of anger but held it in check. He needed to stay calm. "I want to speak to someone higher up. I will not leave until I do." Victor's eyes narrowed, and for a moment Darnell saw a flicker of uncertainty in the manager's demeanor. "You're wasting your time. No one is going to take your side." Darnell's heart raced as he prepared to push back harder. He had to make Victor recognize the gravity of the situation, not just for himself, but for anyone else who might face similar discrimination. "Let's find out then," Darnell replied, his voice steady. "I'm not afraid to escalate this." Victor's expression darkened. "You're playing a dangerous game, right? You think you can just walk in here and make demands?" "I'm not just walking in here. I'm standing up for what's right," Darnell shot back, determination igniting his words. The tension hung heavy in the air, and Darnell knew he was on the precipice of something monumental. He would either break free of Victor's oppressive grip or find himself tangled further in a web of lies and prejudice. But deep down, he felt a flicker of hope. This was only the beginning. Darnell stood his ground, heart racing as he faced Victor Lang, the hotel manager whose disdain for him was palpable. The lobby felt like a battlefield, charged with the tension between them. Darnell took a deep breath, reminding himself that he had to remain calm and composed. "Look, Victor," Darnell began, his tone firm but measured. "I'm not here to cause trouble. I just want a fair chance to stay at this hotel, just like any other guest." Victor crossed his arms, the smirk on his face now replaced by a steely glare. "Fairness? You think this is about fairness? This is about standards. You don't fit the profile of our clientele." "What does that even mean?" Darnell shot back, incredulous. "You're judging me based on the color of my skin, not my character." Victor leaned in closer, lowering his voice as if to share a secret. "You think I'm the one with the problem? This is how things work here. If you don't like it, there's the door." Darnell felt the anger boiling beneath his skin, but he refused to let it explode. Instead, he took a step back, collecting his thoughts. He needed leverage, something to shift the balance of power in this confrontation. "I'm not going to leave," he said, his voice steady. "I'll be filing a complaint. I'll call the local press if I have to. You can't treat people like this and expect to get away with it." "Go ahead," Victor replied dismissively, waving a hand. "You think anyone will care? This hotel has been operating like this for decades. You're just one angry guest." Darnell felt his pulse quicken. The man's arrogance was infuriating, but it also ignited a flame within him. He was not just one guest, he was a voice for those who had been silenced for too long. "Maybe I am just one guest," Darnell said, "but I'm not the only one who's been treated this way. You're running a business, and there are laws against discrimination. I will make sure that everyone knows about your practices." The receptionist, who had been watching the exchange with wide eyes, finally spoke up. "Mr. Lang, perhaps we should consider the guests' concerns. It's not good for business to turn away patrons without cause." Victor shot her a glare that could freeze fire. "Stay out of this, Margaret. This is between me and him." Darnell noticed the way Margaret shifted uncomfortably, the tension in the air thickening. It was clear that she had witnessed Victor's behavior before. Perhaps he wasn't the first to stand up to the manager, nor would he be the last. "I'm not backing down," Darnell said, looking between Victor and Margaret. "If you won't listen to me, I'll take my concerns elsewhere. You might think you're untouchable, but this hotel is part of a community. Your actions have consequences." Victor's eyes narrowed, and for a moment Darnell thought he saw a flicker of fear behind the bravado. "You think you can just waltz in here and dictate how things are run? You're sorely mistaken." "I'm not dictating anything," Darnell replied, his voice raising slightly, fueled by passion. "I'm asking for basic respect. You run a hotel, Victor. This should be a place of refuge, not a battleground for your prejudice." The manager huffed, visibly agitated. "This isn't some community center, right? This is a business, and I'll run it however I see fit, regardless of your protests." Darnell felt the weight of frustration building within him, but he was determined to remain composed. He would not let Victor's dismissive attitude derail his mission. He needed to think strategically. "Fine," Darnell said, taking a step back to gather his thoughts. "If you're so confident in your policies, let's bring in someone who can mediate. I want to speak to a regional manager or corporate. You can't hide behind your position forever." Victor scoffed, but Darnell pressed on. "Let's see how you handle this when the higher-ups are involved. I'm not going to let you bully me or anyone else." "Good luck with that," Victor taunted. "You think they'll care about you? They'll side with me. This is my hotel, and I have the final say." Darnell's resolve only strengthened. "Then let's see how far your arrogance gets you. I'll make sure to document everything. I'll reach out to local advocacy groups, and I'll make this a public issue." Victor rolled his eyes, but Darnell could tell that the manager was beginning to crack. The confidence he had exuded earlier was wavering. "Go ahead," Victor said, but Darnell noted the slight tremor in his voice. "But don't say I didn't warn you." "Don't worry," Darnell replied, a small smile creeping onto his face. "I'm just getting started." Determined to make his point, Darnell took out his phone and began recording the conversation. "I'm documenting this because I want proof of your discriminatory practices. This is unacceptable behavior for a hotel manager." Victor's face turned red, his anger palpable. "You can't just record me without my permission. That's illegal." "I have every right to protect myself," Darnell shot back. "You're the one who's breaking the law by refusing service based on race." Victor stepped closer, his voice low and threatening. "You're playing a dangerous game, right? You have no idea what you're getting into." Darnell felt a surge of adrenaline. "And you have no idea who you're dealing with. I won't be intimidated by your threats." Realizing he was at an impasse, Darnell decided to pivot his approach. "You know what, Victor? I'm going to take a moment to collect my thoughts. But I will be back, and when I return, I expect to speak to someone who can actually make decisions, not just someone who hides behind a desk." With that, Darnell turned on his heel and walked out of the hotel, the weight of the confrontation still heavy on his chest, but lightened by the clarity of his purpose. Outside, the cool evening air felt refreshing against his skin. He took a moment to breathe deeply, calming his racing heart. Darnell knew he had to gather allies. He couldn't tackle this issue alone. As he walked down the street, he pulled out his phone again, scrolling through contacts until he found Marcus's name. He needed someone to lean on, someone who could provide support and perhaps help him strategize his next steps. He hit call, and after a few rings, Marcus picked up. "Hey, Darnell, how's it going?" "Not great," Darnell admitted, his voice heavy with frustration. "I just got evicted from a hotel for no reason other than the color of my skin. The manager is a complete jerk." "What? Are you serious?" Marcus exclaimed, his tone shifting to concern. "What happened?" Darnell took a deep breath, recounting the events of the evening. "I stood up to him, but he's arrogant and doesn't care about anyone but himself. I'm going to report him, but I need to figure out how to handle this properly." "Dude, you have to make sure you document everything," Marcus urged. "Get the word out. People need to know." "Exactly," Darnell replied, feeling a sense of solidarity through the phone. "I plan to reach out to local advocacy groups, maybe even the media. This isn't just about me, it's about everyone who's been marginalized." "Let me know how I can help," Marcus said. "You know I've got your back." As they hung up, Darnell felt a renewed sense of purpose. He wasn't alone in this fight. With allies and a plan, he could take on Victor and the Elmwood Inn. Determined to regroup and strategize, Darnell walked back toward the hotel. This time, he would be ready. He wouldn't back down. Darnell stood outside the Elmwood Inn, the warm glow of the streetlights illuminating his determined expression. He had spent the night crafting a plan, fueled by conversations with Marcus and research on local advocacy groups. He wasn't just going to let Victor Lang's blatant discrimination slide. No, Darnell was ready to take decisive action. With a deep breath, he pushed through the hotel's heavy doors, the familiar jingle of the bell echoing in the lobby. It felt different this time. The air was charged with anticipation. Darnell was not just a guest now. He was a force to be reckoned with. As he strode toward the reception desk, he noticed the same older receptionist, Margaret, looking up from her computer. Her expression was neutral, but Darnell could sense the tension beneath her calm facade. He approached with purpose. "Good evening, Margaret," he said, forcing a smile. "Is Mr. Lang available?" She hesitated, glancing around as if checking for Victor's presence. "He's in his office, but I'm not sure he's ready to see you." "I'll wait," Darnell replied, determination underlying his tone. He could feel the weight of the moment, the significance of standing up against a man who thrived on oppression. Margaret nodded slowly, her eyes betraying a flicker of sympathy. "I'll let him know you're here." As she walked away, Darnell took a moment to survey the lobby. The decor was a mix of faded elegance and neglect, much like the attitudes that seemed to linger in the air. It was a space that should have felt welcoming, but instead it was tainted by Victor's presence. After a few moments, Margaret returned, her expression tight. "Mr. Lang will see you now." Darnell nodded, his heart pounding as he followed her to Victor's office. The door was slightly ajar, and he could hear the low murmur of voices inside. As they approached, Darnell caught snippets of conversation, Victor's tone sharp and dismissive. "It's not worth the hassle," Victor said, his voice dripping with disdain. "Just tell them we're fully booked. We don't need any trouble." Darnell's stomach twisted at the words. Victor was discussing him as if he were an inconvenience, a nuisance to be dismissed. He steeled himself, reminding himself of his purpose. Margaret knocked lightly on the door before opening it. "Mr. Lang, Darnell Wright is here to see you." Victor's head snapped up, a flicker of annoyance crossing his features. "Send him in," he said, his voice flat. Darnell stepped inside, the door closing behind him with a soft click. The office was dimly lit, filled with the musty scent of old books and polished wood. Victor sat behind a large oak desk, his posture rigid as he regarded Darnell with thinly veiled contempt. "Right," Victor said, nodding curtly. "What can I do for you?" Darnell took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment. "I want to discuss the incident from last night." Victor leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. "What's there to discuss? I have the right to refuse service to anyone I deem unfit for my hotel." "That's not how the law works, Victor," Darnell replied, his voice steady. "You can't discriminate against guests based on their race. It's illegal, and I'm not going to let this slide." Victor's expression hardened. "You think you can come in here and lecture me on the law? I've been managing this hotel for over 20 years. I know how to run my business." Darnell leaned forward, refusing to be intimidated. "Your business practices are outdated and discriminatory. I'm not just an angry guest. I'm a voice for those who have been silenced in places like this. I will not let you treat people like this without consequences." Victor's face reddened with anger, but Darnell pressed on. "I'm reaching out to local advocacy groups and the media. They need to know what's happening here." Victor's eyes narrowed, and for a moment Darnell could see the fear flickering behind the manager's bravado. "You think you can just waltz in here and make demands?" he sneered. "You have no idea who you're dealing with." "I know exactly who I'm dealing with," Darnell shot back. "You're a man who hides behind a position of power, using it to exert control over others. But that ends today." "Who do you think you are?" Victor spat, his voice rising. "You're nothing but a nobody trying to make a name for yourself." "I'm someone who refuses to be walked over," Darnell replied, his tone unwavering. "And I'm not scared of you or your threats." The tension in the room crackled like static electricity. Darnell could feel the adrenaline coursing through his veins, a mixture of anger and determination propelling him forward. He wasn't about to back down now. "Let's make this simple," Victor said, his tone shifting to one of false calm. "You can either drop this nonsense and leave quietly, or I will make sure your name is blacklisted from every hotel in this region. Darnell felt a surge of defiance. You can't intimidate me, Victor. I'm not going to be silenced. This is about more than just me. It's about everyone who has been disrespected in this hotel. Victor scoffed, leaning back in his chair as if dismissing Darnell's words. You're just one person. You think you can change anything? I'm not just one person, Darnell asserted. I'm part of a community that's tired of being marginalized, and I will make sure that people know about this. Good luck with that, Victor replied, a smirk creeping onto his face. But I assure you, no one cares about your little crusade. Darnell took a deep breath, knowing he had to remain calm. I'm not doing this alone. I have allies, and I will make sure that your actions come to light. Victor's smirk faltered slightly, and Darnell seized the moment. You may think you're untouchable, but I promise you, the community will rally around this. You can't hide behind your desk forever. The silence that followed hung heavily in the air, and Darnell could see the gears turning in Victor's mind. The manager was beginning to realize that his power was not as absolute as he had believed. Let's say, Victor began, his voice low and calculated, that I were to reconsider my stance on your eviction. What would you be willing to do in return? Darnell raised an eyebrow, taken aback by the sudden shift in Victor's demeanor. What do you mean? I mean, perhaps there's a way for us to come to an understanding, Victor suggested, his tone slick with manipulation. You could drop your complaints, and I might be able to find a way to keep you here, as a guest in good standing. Darnell felt a surge of disgust. You think you can buy me off? You think I'm going to forget what you've done? I'm offering you a chance to avoid a messy situation, Victor pressed. Think about it. You could have a comfortable stay here, and I could overlook last night's incident, but you have to play along. Darnell shook his head, his resolve unwavering. I'm not interested in your offers. This isn't about me getting a free stay. It's about holding you accountable for your actions. Victor leaned forward, his expression shifting to one of frustrated aggression. You're making a mistake, right? You don't know what you're getting into. Darnell met Victor's gaze, unflinching. And you don't know who you're dealing with. I'm not afraid of you. With that, Darnell turned on his heel and strode out of the office, the door slamming shut behind him. He could feel the adrenaline coursing through him, a mixture of anger and empowerment. As he walked back into the lobby, he noticed the other guests watching him with curiosity. Darnell knew he had to keep the momentum going. He couldn't let Victor's threats deter him. He pulled out his phone and began drafting a message to the local advocacy group he had researched the night before. He needed to gather support, to build a coalition that could stand against the discrimination permeating the Elmwood Inn. Darnell stepped out of Victor's office, the weight of the encounter still heavy on his shoulders. He could feel the eyes of the other guests in the lobby following him, curiosity mingling with disbelief. He had confronted the hotel manager, but the battle was far from over. He needed to act quickly to secure his position and gather allies. As he made his way to the lobby entrance, he spotted Margaret at the reception desk. She was watching him with a mix of apprehension and admiration. Darnell paused for a moment, considering whether to share his plans with her. If she was willing to speak out, she could provide valuable insight into Victor's behavior in the hotel's practices. Margaret, he said, approaching her, can we talk for a moment? She looked around, ensuring Victor was occupied before leaning closer. I'm not sure that's a good idea, Darnell. Victor is unpredictable. He doesn't take kindly to people who challenge him. I understand, Darnell replied, lowering his voice. But I need to know if there are others who feel the same way about his treatment of guests. You've been here a while. You must have seen things. Margaret hesitated, her eyes darting toward Victor's office. I have, but I can't just speak out. It could cost me my job. I get that, Darnell said, empathy lacing his tone. But think about it. If we don't stand up to him, nothing will change. This hotel could be a place where everyone feels welcome, but it's not. Not under his management. She sighed, glancing at the office door once more before meeting his gaze. You're right. I've seen him treat guests poorly, but I never thought anyone would actually stand up to him. I admire your courage, Darnell. Thank you, he said, but I need your help. If you know of any incidents, any patterns of discrimination, it could strengthen my case. Margaret nodded slowly, weighing her options. I've seen him deny service to guests of color before. He'll make excuses, say it's a full house, or that the rooms are reserved. It's always the same story. Darnell felt a surge of determination. If you're willing to help, It could make a big difference. We could document everything, gather testimonials from other guests who have experienced the same treatment. I'd be willing to share what I know, but we need to be careful, she warned. Victor has connections, and he's been here long enough to have some influence. We can start small, Darnell suggested. Let's gather information without drawing too much attention. If we can compile enough evidence, I'll take it to the advocacy groups in the media. Margaret considered his words, her expression softening. Okay, I'll help, but I can't get involved too deeply. I have to keep my job. Understood, Darnell replied, a sense of hope blossoming within him. Every little bit helps. As they finished their conversation, Darnell's phone buzzed with a notification. He glanced down to see a message from Marcus. Have you heard back from the advocacy group? Darnell quickly typed a response. Not yet, I'm working on it. I'll keep you posted. Keep me updated, Margaret said, her voice low. I'll be watching for anyone who might be willing to share their story. Thank you, Margaret, Darnell said, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. This is a step in the right direction. After their conversation, Darnell stepped out of the hotel, the evening air refreshing against his skin. He needed to find a nearby cafe with Wi-Fi to research the advocacy groups further and draft a solid complaint. The community needed to know about Victor's actions, and he wanted to be prepared to present a strong case. As he walked, Darnell's mind raced with ideas. He envisioned a campaign that would not only expose Victor, but also promote inclusivity and change at the Elmwood Inn. He would take this battle beyond the walls of the hotel, rallying the community and using social media to amplify their voices. He found a cozy cafe just a few blocks away, its interior warm and inviting. He settled at a corner table and pulled out his laptop, eager to dive into the research. As he connected to the Wi-Fi, he opened a new document, ready to outline his plans. First, he searched for local advocacy groups focused on civil rights and hospitality discrimination. He found several organizations that had previously supported similar cases. Darnell made a list of their contact information, determined to reach out to them within the next few hours. Next, he began drafting a detailed account of his experience at the Elmwood Inn. He included the timeline of events, his conversation with Victor, and the impact of the discriminatory practices he had witnessed. He knew that presenting a clear and concise narrative would be crucial in gaining support. After an hour of focused work, Darnell stepped back to review what he had written. It was a solid foundation, but he needed to gather more evidence and testimonies to strengthen his case. He decided to reach out to Marcus again. He quickly typed a message. Hey, can you help me reach out to some people? I need testimonials from anyone who's had issues at the Elmwood Inn. Almost immediately, his phone buzzed with Marcus's reply. Absolutely. I'll start spreading the word. Feeling a surge of gratitude, Darnell smiled. He had allies now, people who understood the importance of standing up against injustice. As he continued to type, he felt a sense of purpose wash over him. This was about more than just getting a room. It was about dismantling the toxic culture that had taken root in the hotel. Later that evening, Darnell returned to his apartment, exhausted but invigorated. He knew that the fight ahead would be challenging, but he was ready to face it head-on. He spent the rest of the night refining his document, ensuring that he had every detail accounted for. The next morning, Darnell woke up early, the sun streaming through his window. He had a sense of urgency, a feeling that today was the day to put his plan into action. He brewed a strong cup of coffee and sat down at his laptop, ready to send out emails to the advocacy groups he had researched. As he typed out his messages, he felt a mixture of excitement and apprehension. Would they take him seriously? Would they be willing to help? He pressed send, then took a deep breath, knowing that he had taken the first step toward making a difference. With each passing hour, Darnell began to receive replies. Some groups expressed their support and willingness to help, while others requested more information about his situation. Each response fueled his determination, confirming that he was on the right path. By the end of the day, Darnell had gathered a small coalition of support. He had secured meetings with several advocacy groups and was even in contact with a local journalist who was interested in covering his story. He felt a surge of hope as he reflected on how far he had come in such a short time. He was no longer just a victim of Victor's discrimination. He was becoming an agent of change. Darnell knew that the road ahead would be long and fraught with challenges, but he was prepared to face them. The time for action had come, and he was ready to fight for justice, not just for himself, but for everyone who had been marginalized by Victor Lang's oppressive regime at the Elmwood Inn. The days that followed were a whirlwind of activity, each one bringing Darnell closer to his goal. With the support of local advocacy groups and the growing momentum of his campaign, he felt a sense of empowerment unlike anything he had experienced before. But he knew that Victor Lang would not go down without a fight. On a bright Thursday morning, Darnell received a call from Tanya, a representative from the advocacy group he had contacted. "Darnell, we're ready to assist you," she said, her voice filled with enthusiasm. "We've been gathering stories from others who have experienced similar issues at the Elmwood Inn. We want to set up a meeting with you and get the ball rolling." "Thank you, Tanya," Darnell replied, his heart racing. "I'm eager to see how we can work together to tackle this." "Let's meet at our office tomorrow at noon," she suggested. "We'll discuss strategy, and I can introduce you to some key people who can amplify your message." Darnell agreed, excitement bubbling within him. He spent the rest of the day preparing notes, compiling testimonies from other guests, and strategizing how to present his case. But deep down, he felt an undercurrent of anxiety. He understood that confronting Victor would not be easy. The man was powerful and had the means to retaliate. The next day, Darnell arrived at the advocacy group's office, which was located in a bustling part of town. The atmosphere was vibrant, filled with the energy of people dedicated to fighting for justice. Tanya greeted him with a warm smile and led him to a conference room where several other representatives were already seated. "Everyone, this is Darnell Wright," Tanya introduced him. "He's been facing discrimination at the Elmwood Inn and is here to share his story." As Darnell recounted his experience, he noticed the expressions of shock and sympathy on the faces of the group. They listened intently, taking notes and asking questions. He shared details about Victor's treatment, the dismissive attitude he had encountered, and the testimonies he had gathered from other guests. "Darnell, this is infuriating," one of the representatives, a woman named Lisa, said. "We've heard similar stories about that hotel. This isn't an isolated incident. It's part of a larger pattern of discrimination." Darnell felt a surge of determination. "Exactly. If we can compile enough evidence, we can hold Victor accountable and start a movement for change." After an hour of discussion, the group developed a plan of action. They would organize a press conference to unveil the findings, inviting local media and community members to attend. They would also gather testimonials from former guests to highlight the pervasive discrimination at the Elmwood Inn. "This is going to take persistence and courage," Tanya cautioned. "But if we do this right, we can create a significant impact." Darnell nodded, feeling a sense of responsibility. "I'm ready to do whatever it takes." The following week was a blur of preparation. Darnell and the advocacy team worked tirelessly to coordinate the press conference, reaching out to community leaders and gathering support from other organizations. They designed flyers and created social media campaigns to spread the word. But as the event approached, Darnell couldn't shake the feeling that Victor would retaliate. He had seen how dismissive and arrogant the manager could be, and he knew that Victor wouldn't take kindly to being challenged. On the day of the press conference, Darnell arrived early at the community center where the event was being held. The room buzzed with anticipation as advocates, supporters, and members of the media gathered, eager to hear his story. Darnell took a deep breath, trying to calm the nerves that threatened to overwhelm him. As the clock struck noon, Tanya stepped to the podium. "Thank you all for being here today. We are gathered to address a serious issue affecting our community, discrimination in our local hospitality industry, specifically at the Elmwood Inn." Cheers erupted from the audience, and Darnell felt a rush of adrenaline. This was it, the moment he had been waiting for. "Today we will hear from Darnell Wright, who has bravely come forward to share his experience," Tanya continued, gesturing for Darnell to join her at the front. Darnell stepped up to the microphone, his heart pounding in his chest. He looked out at the sea of faces, friends, allies, and those who had come to support the cause. "Thank you for being here," he began, his voice steady. "I'm here to share my story, not just for myself, but for everyone who has faced discrimination at the Elmwood Inn." He recounted his experience, detailing the eviction, the confrontations with Victor, and the testimonies from other guests. As he spoke, he could feel the energy in the room shift. People leaned in, captivated by his words. He shared the importance of standing up against injustice and the need for change in the hospitality industry. After he finished, the room erupted in applause. Darnell felt a wave of emotion wash over him. This was not just his fight anymore. It was a collective battle for justice and equality. As the press conference continued, local reporters began to ask questions. One journalist, a sharp-eyed woman named Emily, raised her hand. "Darnell, have you reached out to the management of the Elmwood Inn for a response to these allegations?" Darnell knew this question would come. "I attempted to speak with Victor Lang directly, but he refused to acknowledge the discrimination occurring under his management. He has shown a pattern of dismissing concerns and perpetuating a toxic environment." Emily nodded, taking notes. "And what are your next steps?" "I plan to file a formal complaint with the local authorities and continue to work with advocacy groups to ensure that this issue is addressed properly," Darnell replied, resolute. After the press conference, Darnell felt a renewed sense of purpose. But as he exited the venue, his phone buzzed with a message from Marcus. "Did you see the news?" Victor's already responded. Darnell's heart raced as he pulled up the news app. The headline read, "Local hotel manager denies discrimination claims, calls allegations baseless." The article quoted Victor's statements, downplaying Darnell's experiences and attacking his character. "Unbelievable," Darnell muttered under his breath. "He's not going to back down." Just then, Tanya approached him, concern etched on her face. "Did you see the article?" "Yes," Darnell replied, frustration boiling within him. "He's trying to discredit me." "We need to respond quickly," Tanya said firmly. "We can't let him control the narrative. We have more evidence and testimonials that we can release." "Let's do it," Darnell said, determination surging through him. "We'll show the community that we're serious about this." That evening, Darnell and the advocacy team worked late into the night, drafting a response and compiling additional testimonies. They created a press release highlighting the pattern of discrimination at the Elmwood Inn, complete with supporting evidence and testimonials from other guests who had faced similar treatment. By morning, they were ready to go public. Darnell felt a mixture of nerves and excitement as they sent out the press release, knowing that this was a pivotal moment in their fight. As the days passed, the story gained traction. Local news outlets picked it up, and social media exploded with support. Darnell received messages from individuals across the community, sharing their experiences and expressing solidarity. But Victor was not done fighting back. He called an emergency meeting with his staff, furious that his reputation was being tarnished. "We need to control this narrative," he barked, glaring at Margaret, who sat quietly in the corner. "You will all stand by me, or you'll find yourselves out of a job." Margaret felt a chill run down her spine, but she knew she couldn't let fear dictate her actions. She had seen too many guests treated poorly and knew that she had to support Darnell in the movement for change. "Victor," she spoke up, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "What you are doing is wrong. We can't keep pretending that this isn't happening." Victor glared at her, his anger palpable. "You think you can lecture me? You're nothing but a cog in this machine." "I might be, but the machine needs to change," she replied, her voice growing stronger. "I'm not afraid to stand up for what's right." The tension in the room was thick, but Margaret's courage seemed to bolster the resolve of her coworkers. One by one, they began to voice their support for Darnell, expressing their desire for a more inclusive and respectful environment. Victor's face turned crimson with rage as he realized he was losing control of his staff. "You'll all regret this," he warned, but the determination in the room had already shifted. Meanwhile, Darnell continued to rally support within the community. He organized meetings with local leaders to discuss the need for change in the hospitality industry, emphasizing the importance of accountability and inclusivity. As the movement gained momentum, Darnell felt a sense of hope blossoming. He knew that the fight was far from over, but he was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. He was no longer just a victim. He was a catalyst for change, a voice for those who had been silenced. With each passing day, Darnell felt more empowered to stand up against Victor and demand justice, not just for himself, but for everyone who had faced discrimination at the Elmwood Inn. The path ahead may have been fraught with challenges, but Darnell was ready. Darnell stood before the mirror in his apartment, the reflection staring back at him, filled with a sense of purpose and transformation. The past few weeks had been tumultuous, but they had also ignited a fire within him. He had found his voice, and now it was time to amplify it. Today was the day of the follow-up press conference, one aimed at holding Victor Lang accountable for the systemic discrimination permeating the Elmwood Inn. As he gathered his notes and prepared to leave, Darnell couldn't shake the feeling of anticipation mixed with anxiety. He had witnessed the power of the community rallying around him, but he also remembered Victor's threats. The man was desperate to maintain control, and Darnell knew that Victor would not let go of his power easily. The venue for the press conference was a local community center, chosen for its accessibility and significance to the neighborhood. Darnell arrived early, his heart racing as he stepped into the bustling space filled with supporters, advocates, and members of the media. The atmosphere buzzed with excitement, but Darnell felt the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. He spotted Tanya, who was busy setting up the microphones and arranging chairs. "You're looking sharp, Darnell," she said, flashing him an encouraging smile. "Are you ready for this?" "I think so," he replied, taking a deep breath. "I just want to make sure our message is clear." "It will be. We've got your back," she assured him. "We're all in this together." As the room filled with Darnell's confidence began to build, he looked around at the faces of people who had come to support him, friends, fellow advocates, and even some former guests of the Elmwood Inn who had experienced discrimination firsthand. With each person who entered, he felt a surge of determination. This was not just about him, it was about everyone who had been marginalized. The press conference began promptly at noon, and Darnell took a deep breath as he stepped up to the podium. The room quieted, all eyes fixed on him. "Thank you all for being here today," he began, his voice steady. "We are here to shed light on the systemic discrimination that has plagued the Elmwood Inn and to demand accountability from its management." He shared his personal experience, recounting the indignities he had faced at the hands of Victor Lang. But he also highlighted the stories of others, giving voice to those who had suffered in silence. As he spoke, the energy in the room grew, filled with nods of agreement and murmurs of support. "We must stand together," Darnell continued, his passion igniting the crowd. "This isn't just about one hotel, it's about creating a culture of respect and inclusivity in our community. We deserve better than what Victor Lang has offered." As he concluded his speech, the applause echoed through the room, a powerful affirmation of the message he had delivered. Darnell felt a swell of pride as he stepped back from the podium, knowing that he had made an impact. After the speeches, the floor opened up for questions from the media. One reporter raised a hand. "Darnell, have you received any response from Victor Lang regarding these allegations?" Darnell nodded, recalling the press release they had sent out. "Victor has chosen to deny any wrongdoing, but we have gathered enough evidence and testimonials to show that his practices are harmful and discriminatory. We will not stand for this." Another reporter chimed in, "What are your next steps?" "We plan to file a formal complaint with the local authorities and conduct a thorough investigation into the hotel's practices," Darnell replied. "This is just the beginning. We want to ensure that the Elmwood Inn becomes a place where everyone feels welcome, regardless of their background." As the press conference concluded, Darnell felt a sense of triumph and relief wash over him. The community was standing strong behind him, and together they were ready to challenge Victor's reign of discrimination. But as he stepped outside, he was met with the harsh reality of Victor's retaliation. A small group of protesters stood outside the venue, holding signs that read, "Defend Victor," and "Stop the Lies." They shouted slogans, attempting to drown out the voices of the advocates who had gathered to support Darnell. Darnell's heart sank as he realized that Victor was mobilizing his own supporters, people who were willing to defend the status quo. But instead of feeling defeated, a sense of resolve washed over him. He turned to the crowd gathered around him, a mix of supporters and advocates. "We cannot let this discourage us," he shouted, his voice rising above the noise. "This is exactly what we're fighting against: intimidation and division. We stand for justice and equality." The crowd erupted in cheers, their voices harmonizing in a chorus of solidarity. Darnell felt the energy surging through him, a reminder of why he had started this fight in the first place. As the days turned into weeks, the momentum only grew. Darnell and the advocacy group worked tirelessly to gather more testimonies, reaching out to former employees and guests who had experienced discrimination. They organized community meetings, encouraging others to share their stories and join the fight for change. Victor, on the other hand, became increasingly aggressive, attempting to discredit Darnell at every turn. He issued statements to the press, labeling Darnell as a troublemaker and claiming that the allegations were baseless. But with each attempt to undermine Darnell's credibility, the community rallied even harder. The local media began to investigate the claims, uncovering a pattern of discrimination that extended beyond Darnell's experience. Reports surfaced detailing how Victor had routinely denied service to guests of color and had fostered a culture of fear among his staff. The tide was turning, and Victor's reign of intimidation was crumbling. One evening, Darnell received an unexpected call from Margaret, the receptionist who had witnessed Victor's treatment of guests firsthand. "Darnell, I want to help," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I've seen things that I can't keep quiet about anymore. I want to share my story." Darnell felt a surge of hope. "That's amazing, Margaret. Your testimony could make a huge difference. We need to ensure that your voice is heard." The next day, they met in a quiet cafe, and Margaret recounted her experiences with Victor. Her testimony was powerful, detailing the countless instances of discrimination she had witnessed and the fear that had kept her from speaking out. Darnell knew that her words would resonate deeply with the community. With Margaret's testimony in hand, Darnell and the advocacy group organized a press conference to unveil the new evidence. The atmosphere was electric as they prepared to share Margaret's story, and the stakes had never been higher. On the day of the press conference, the crowd was larger than ever. Supporters filled the room, eager to hear Margaret's testimony and stand against Victor's oppressive management. Darnell stood beside her, ready to lend support as she approached the podium. "Thank you all for being here," Margaret began, her voice steady despite the weight of her words. "I've worked at the Elmwood Inn for over a decade, and I've seen things that I can no longer ignore. I've witnessed guests being turned away simply because of the color of their skin, and I've seen good employees silenced out of fear." As she spoke, Darnell watched the room react. Faces reflected shock, anger, and empathy. He felt a sense of pride swelling within him, knowing that they were standing together to fight for justice. Margaret continued, detailing specific incidents and the culture of fear that Victor had fostered. The audience listened intently, and Darnell could feel the shift happening. This was no longer just his fight, it was a collective battle for change. After her powerful testimony, the room erupted in applause. Darnell felt overwhelming gratitude for Margaret's courage and the strength of the community around them. As the press conference concluded, reporters rushed to get statements from both Margaret and Darnell. The media coverage that followed was relentless, with news outlets highlighting the discrimination at the Elmwood Inn and the community's rallying cry for change. Victor's response was swift, but it was clear that his grip on the narrative was slipping. As public outrage grew, Darnell received a call from a local television station, offering him a chance to share his story on air. This was a pivotal moment, a chance to reach even more people and push for real change. That evening, Darnell sat in front of the camera, his heart pounding as he recounted his experiences. He spoke passionately about the need for accountability and the importance of inclusivity in the hospitality industry. "We cannot remain silent in the face of discrimination," he said earnestly. "Together, we can create a space where everyone feels welcome." The response from the community was overwhelming. Individuals from all walks of life reached out to share their support, and social media exploded with hashtags calling for justice at the Elmwood Inn. Days turned into weeks, and the pressure on Victor Lang mounted. Local authorities launched an investigation into the hotel's practices, and advocacy groups mobilized to demand change. The community's resolve was unyielding, and Darnell felt a sense of victory building. Finally, the day came when the news broke. The local authorities had found enough evidence to hold the Elmwood Inn accountable for their discriminatory practices. Victor Lang was suspended pending further investigation, and the community celebrated this monumental step forward. Darnell stood among his supporters, a sense of triumph and relief washing over him. This was just the beginning, but they had made significant strides toward creating a more inclusive environment. As he looked around at the faces of the people who had stood by him through this journey, Darnell felt a deep sense of fulfillment. They had fought together against injustice, and their voices had been heard. The Elmwood Inn would no longer be a symbol of discrimination, but a place where everyone could feel welcome. With the community united, Darnell knew that they had begun to pave the way for lasting change. He smiled, ready for whatever challenges lay ahead, confident that together they could create a future rooted in respect and equality. You've made it to the end. If you enjoyed this story, I am confident that you'll love the next one appearing on the screen now. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, and please give this video a like. I'll see you in the next one.